I was looking at this spreadsheet you sent over, just going through the raw data of the nuclear stockpiles, and I honestly had to stop and put my coffee down. There are two numbers here that I literally cannot wrap my head around.
I have a feeling I know which ones you're looking at.
It's the sheer jump. Okay, so number one, 1945. The United States has exactly 6 nuclear warheads. 6. You can picture that. You can, fit them in a garage.
Manageable. I mean, terrifying, obviously, given what happened in Japan, but physically manageable.
Right. Now, number 2. Fast forward just 20 years, 1965. The United States has 31,265 warheads.
From 6 to over 31,000 in a single generation.
It is. It's an explosion in every sense of the word. And that's just one side of the equation. We haven't even touched the Soviet numbers yet. So today we are diving deep into this stack of data timelines, tables, some very dense analytical essays to figure out the story behind that jump. Because our mission isn't just to, count the bombs. I want to understand the logic. Why? Why build 30,000 a lot of anything designed to end the world?
And that is where the sources take us into some really counterintuitive territory, because if you look closely at the history, you find this central paradox. It's the idea that these weapons, which had the capacity to destroy the globe multiple times over, might have actually been the only thing that prevented World War III.
That's the big idea we need to test today, then. Did the threat of total destruction actually buy the world time?
It's the uncomfortable question at the heart of the Cold War. And to understand it, we have to look at 3 things: the machinery, the twisted strategy that governed it, and ultimately the bill. Because, spoiler alert, the financial cost of this race is a huge part of why the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the hardware itself. The sources include a key term sheet that reads like the world's darkest alphabet soup.
It really does. It's a progression of lethality.
So in the very beginning, we have the A-bomb, the atom bomb.
Right. This is the technology of 1945. Fission weapons. These are city killers dropped from planes. But the sources show that technology didn't plateau there. It accelerated. By the early 50s, we get the H-bomb.
The hydrogen bomb. And practically speaking, what is the difference? Is it just bigger?
It's exponentially bigger. The A-bomb is like lighting a match. The H-bomb is a flamethrower. It's thermonuclear. We're talking about weapons thousands of times more powerful than Hiroshima. And looking at the timeline, the scary part is how close the race was. USA gets the H-bomb in 1952. The Soviets, 1953.
Wow. It's like a tennis match where the ball is the sun. But having the bomb is one thing. Getting it to the other guy's backyard is the real problem, right?
That's the delivery system. And this is where the geography of the world starts to shrink. In the beginning, as the data shows, it was all strategic bombers, big planes.
The planes are slow. They can be shot down. You have radar.
Which is why the game changed completely, and I mean completely, with the invention of the ICBM.
The Intercontinental Ballistic Missile.
A missile with a range of over 3,000 nautical miles. Suddenly, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which had protected the U.S. for 2 centuries, just didn't matter.
And here is where I found a massive surprise in the data. I think most people, myself included, assumed the U.S. was always leading the tech race. We have this image of American technological dominance. But looking at the first-in-race chart...
You saw 1957.
I did. The chart lists the USSR as the first to develop the ICBM in 1957. The USA didn't get there until 1958.
You can't overstate the panic that caused in Washington. This is the Sputnik moment. The Soviets beat the U.S. to the ICBM, they beat them to the satellite, they beat them to early warning radar. For a brief, terrifying window in the late 50s, the Soviet Union appeared to be winning the technological war.
Imagine waking up in 1957 and realizing the people you're afraid of can suddenly drop a bomb on your house from space, and you can't do anything about it.
That was the reality. But the U.S. didn't stay behind. They leapfrogged.
Right. The data shows the U.S. taking the lead in 1960 with the SLBM, the Submarine-Launched Ballistic Missile.
And this is a huge strategic shift. If your missiles are on submarines, they're mobile. They're hiding in the murky depths of the ocean.
So even if the Soviets launch a surprise attack and wipe out every land base in America, the subs are still out there, waiting to fire back.
It guarantees retaliation. It actually stabilizes things a bit, oddly enough, because it makes a surprise attack futile. But then the engineers kept working.
And they came up with 2 more acronyms that just sound like nightmares. ABM and MIRV.
Let's start with the ABM, the anti-ballistic missile. The USSR developed this first in 1968.
Which sounds like a good thing. A missile to shoot down other missiles? That's defense. Why is that a nightmare?
Because of the logic of the Cold War? If I have a shield that can block your sword, I might be tempted to stab you, knowing you can't hurt me back. It makes nuclear war look winnable. And if you think you can win, you might actually start the fight.
I see. It breaks a stalemate. It makes the other side itchy to fire before the shield is fully up.
Correct. So to counter the shield, the U.S. develops the MIRV in 1970. Multiple, independently targetable re-entry vehicle.
That is a mouthful.
It's a technical marvel and a strategic catastrophe. It means one single missile launches, goes up into space, and then it splits. It releases multiple warheads, 3, 6, 10, and each one goes to a different city.
So one missile launch could hit New York, Boston, and Washington simultaneously.
Yes. And if you have 10 warheads coming from one missile, the anti-ballistic missile system gets overwhelmed. It can't shoot them all down.
So the MIRV basically made defense impossible again.
It reestablished the terror.
So we have the tech. We have this escalation ladder. Now I want to look at the scorecard again, specifically that table titled The Buildup of Arms After 1945. Because when you track these numbers across the decades, you see two very different stories playing out.
It's fascinating. Look at the ICBM numbers specifically.
Okay, so in 1960, the U.S. has 295 ICBMs. By 1970, that number jumps to 1,054.
A massive surge.
But then it stops. 1974, it's 1,054. 1979, 1,054. The U.S. just hit a ceiling and said, we're good.
They plateaued. They calculated that 1,054 missiles, combined with their bombers and submarines, was enough to destroy the Soviet Union as a functioning society. Building more didn't add any value.
But the Soviets didn't get the memo. Look at their column.
No, they did not.
They start way behind. 75 ICBMs in 1960, but they don't stop. By 1970, they have 1,300. By 1979, they have nearly 1,400. They completely surpass the U.S. in land-based missiles.
It shows a ruthless, almost paranoid determination to catch up and then exceed the American arsenal. They wanted parity at any cost. But the most dramatic line in this entire table, the one that keeps me up at night, is the warhead count.
We mentioned the U.S. numbers earlier, peaking at over 31,000 in the mid-60s. But look at the Soviet curve. In 1945, 0. In 1955, 200.
Still just a fraction of the U.S. stockpile at that time.
But by 1985, the USSR has 39,197 warheads. The U.S. had actually dropped down to about 22,000.
Think about that. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union held nearly 40,000 nuclear weapons.
It begs the question, where do you even put 40,000 nuclear weapons? And more importantly, why? I mean, honestly, after the first few thousand, aren't you just bouncing the rubble? What is the point of bomb number 39,000?
That is the key takeaway from the data. By the late 1960s, both sides had accumulated enough weapons to destroy the world several times over. The essay sources argue that this wasn't about military utility anymore. It wasn't about targeting. It was about fear.
It became a psychological game.
Completely. It was essential for each side to have so many weapons that the other side would look at the pile and say, okay, we cannot attack them. It's impossible.
So having more weapons wasn't about using them. It was about making sure the other guy didn't use his.
And that leads us directly into the military strategy. Because you can't build 40,000 warheads without a philosophy to justify them. And the sources show this philosophy shifted wildly over time.
Right. So looking at the essays, how did the plan evolve? Because I assume the plan wasn't always blow everything up immediately.
Well, actually, in the 1950s, under President Eisenhower, that was pretty much the plan. It was called massive retaliation.
Massive retaliation. It sounds like a wrestling move.
It was a blunt instrument. It meant that if the Soviets stepped out of line-invaded Western Europe, for example, the USA wouldn't just fight back on the ground. They would use all their nuclear weapons against the communist world.
All of them. That sounds like...
Yeah.
Well, bluff.
It was a total war approach. Eisenhower wanted to make the cost of aggression so high that the Soviets wouldn't dare move. But as the Soviets built up their own arsenal, that threat became a suicide pact. If you nuke them, they nuke you back. Everyone dies.
You need a new plan.
Enter Robert McNamara, the U.S. Secretary of Defense. The sources detail his shift to a strategy called counterforce.
Counterforce. That sounds more surgical.
Yeah.
More controlled.
That was the hope. The idea was, hey, if a war starts, let's not target cities. Let's just target the enemy's military bases, their silos, their airfields.
Trying to make nuclear war winnable, or at least survivable, by leaving the civilians out of it.
Ideally. But then reality hit. The essays point to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 as the moment this theory fell apart.
How so?
Because in the fog of war, surgical is a fantasy. If you see 100 missiles coming over the horizon on your radar, you don't know if they are aiming for your silos or for New York City. You can't wait to find out. You have to launch everything you have before you get hit.
So limited nuclear war is a myth. Once the first missile flies, the restraint just evaporates.
Correct. And realizing that terrified everyone. So if limited war is impossible and massive retaliation is suicide, where do you land?
You land at the most famous acronym of the Cold War. M-MAD.
Mutually assured destruction.
It really is the most appropriate acronym in history.
It is. This became the accepted strategy from the mid-60s to the mid-80s. The logic is simple but twisted. If both sides know, without a shadow of a doubt, that using a weapon guarantees their own death, neither side will fire the first shot.
It's a staring contest, where both people are holding grenades with the pins pulled. You're safe only because the other guy is just as scared as you are.
That's it. There's a quote in the source material from a historian named Gaddis. He argues that with Meiji, destruction was exchanged for duration.
Destruction exchanged for duration, so the terror of the weapons actually bought stability.
That's the paradox. Because the weapons were so terrible, the superpowers became incredibly cautious.
And this brings us to the Cold War paradox. Because looking back, we know there was no World War III. We didn't have a direct clash between U.S. and Soviet troops.
The danger of nuclear weapons forced them to avoid head-on confrontations. The sources list some really telling examples. Take the Hungarian uprising in 1956.
Right. The Hungarians rose up against Soviet rule. They were begging for American help.
And traditionally, a superpower might have sent troops. But Eisenhower, he froze. He made it clear he would not intervene.
Because intervening might trigger a fight with the Red Army.
Which triggers the nukes. Same thing in the Korean War. The sources note that the USSR took no direct role on the battlefield. And on the American side, General MacArthur was screaming to nuke China to win the war.
And the president fired him.
He had to. They actively avoided widening the war because the cost of escalation was the end of civilization.
So instead of fighting directly, they fought by proxy.
Right. You fight in Vietnam, you fight in Afghanistan, you fight in Angola. You use other people's countries to settle your scores, but you don't fight in Moscow or Washington.
It's fascinating how the weapons that were supposedly the key measurement of strength actually handcuffed the superpowers. They couldn't use their biggest stick.
They couldn't use it, but they had to pay for it. And this is the final and perhaps most critical piece of the puzzle the sources give us. The bill.
We talked about those 39,000 Soviet warheads. I can't even imagine the infrastructure needed to maintain that.
It was astronomical. The essay notes that this obsession with the arms race disguised a fundamental truth. The Soviet Union was effectively a third-world economy with first-world weapons.
How much were they spending?
The estimates in the source material are staggering. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union was spending between 15% and 17% of its annual gross national product on the military.
If 15 to 17%.
To give you context, the U.S. was spending maybe 5 or 6%.
That is a massive chunk of an economy.
It's unsustainable. Imagine taking nearly 20 cents of every dollar the entire country generates and pouring it into silos and submarines that sit there and do nothing. That is money that isn't going to agriculture. It isn't going to housing. It isn't going to consumer goods.
So while the U.S. could afford both guns and butter weapons and a consumer economy, the Soviets had to choose.
And they chose guns. There's a tragic irony there. You had Soviet citizens standing in line for hours to buy bread, while overhead, their government was flying the most advanced satellite technology in human history.
The sources argue this is what broke them, right?
Explicitly, the text says, ultimately, the cost of nuclear weapons for the Soviet Union was to contribute to its economic decay and eventual collapse.
So the arms race didn't end with a bang. It ended with a bounce check.
Basically, the cost is actually what drove both sides to the negotiating table in the 1970s, the SALT treaties. They signed arms agreements not because they were suddenly friends or because they had a moral awakening. They signed them because the race was becoming too expensive to sustain.
It's really striking when you step back and look at the whole picture. We started with 6 bombs. We ended up with tens of thousands. We went from planes to submarines to missiles that split into multiple warheads.
And we moved from a strategy of we will destroy you to we will destroy each other, so let's not do anything.
It's a journey from massive retaliation to mutually assured destruction to economic collapse.
And that journey defines the Cold War.
So if we look at the stack of sources, what is the final verdict? What's the takeaway for us today?
I think the most provocative insight here is that the nuclear arms race was a double-edged sword in the strangest way. On one side, it created a constant existential terror for decades. People lived with the real fear that the sky could turn to fire at any moment.
But on the other side,
On the other side, that very terror and the immense cost required to maintain it is arguably what prevented a Third World War.
the weapons intended to ensure dominance ultimately exposed the fragility of the Soviet system.
Exactly. They bought security at the price of solvency.
It's a sobering thought. We often look at technology as the thing that changes warfare. But in this case, the technology froze warfare in place, while the economics worked in the background to end the conflict.
It's a lesson worth remembering. Strategy isn't just about what you can destroy, it's about what you can afford to maintain.
Well, on that note, I think I need to go step away from the spreadsheets for a while. It's been a fascinating, if slightly terrifying, look through the alphabet soup of destruction.
It certainly puts things in perspective.
We hope this gave you a clearer picture of the logic behind the madness of the Cold War. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.